You are about to learn the one shift that separates people who make good decisions under pressure from people who just feel busy thinking. This isn't about being smarter. It's not about more information, more research, more pro and con lists. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why. The harder you try to think your way to clarity, the further away it gets. And later I'll show you why the exact strategy most people use to think it through is the thing quietly wrecking their decisions. Picture this. Two people staring at the same job offer, the same relationship question, the same 2 a.m. ceiling. One of them decides in 10 minutes and sleeps fine. The other spends 3 weeks in their own head and still isn't sure. Same facts. Different outcome. If you want to know why, drop the word clarity in the comments right now because you're going to need it later. You already know the feeling. You wake up and before your feet hit the floor, your phone is in your hand and 40 tabs are already open in your skull. The email you haven't answered, the comment that stung a little more than it should have, the decision you were supposed to make yesterday and quietly pushed to today. You get in the shower and instead of waking up, you're replaying an argument from 6 months ago, editing your side of it, winning it this time, adding a devastating line you never actually said. You sit down at your desk and there are 12 legitimate things demanding your attention, and somehow you spend the first 90 minutes doing none of them, just vibrating. Low hum of unfinished thinking in the background of everything, the kind that doesn't show up on any calendar or to-do list but somehow costs you more than most of the things that do. At work, someone says something short and slightly cold in a meeting, and you spend the rest of the afternoon trying to figure out what it meant, what you did, what you should say back. You draft 3 versions of a reply in your head before lunch and send none of them, because by then the moment has passed and all that's left is the residue. At home, your partner asks an ordinary question. Did you think about what we talked about? And it lands like an accusation, because you're already carrying 40 other unresolved things and this is the 41st straw. You snap slightly or go quiet, and neither of you quite knows why the temperature in the room just changed. With your family, you rehearse conversations that haven't happened yet and probably never will. Bracing for conflict that exists only in your head, running the argument to its worst possible ending before anyone has said a single word out loud. Even your downtime isn't really down. You sit to watch something and half your attention is still somewhere else, running background calculations on a decision you haven't made. Should I take the offer? Should I say something? Should I just let it go? The same loop, over and over, producing the feeling of effort without ever producing an answer. None of this is dramatic. That's the trap. It's not a crisis, it's a slow leak, and slow leaks are the ones people ignore the longest because there's never one obvious moment that forces you to deal with it. And the cost is never one big thing. It's your energy spent on rehearsals nobody asked for. It's your self-respect eroding a little every time you make a decision out of anxiety instead of judgment and then quietly resent yourself for it. It's your time, the actual hours, gone into a kind of thinking that produces heat but no light. Worst of all, it's your peace, the specific quiet confidence of a person who trusts their own mind. You lose that first, and you don't usually notice until it's gone. Think about the last genuinely good decision you made, a fast one that turned out well, one you didn't agonize over for a week. Now think about the last decision that took you the longest, that you turned over the most times, that you asked the most people about. There's a decent chance the second one wasn't actually better thought through. It was just more anxious, and anxiety has a way of disguising itself as thoroughness so convincingly that you mistake the exhaustion for diligence. Nobody hands out a medal for how many hours you spent suffering over a choice. The hours themselves aren't proof of anything except that you were uncomfortable for a long time, and discomfort on its own was never the same thing as insight. Here's where an old idea earns its place. Almost 2,000 years ago, a Stoic teacher named Epictetus, a man who started life enslaved and ended it running his own school of philosophy, kept coming back to one blunt observation. It isn't the event that disturbs you, it's your judgment about the event. The meeting comment doesn't hurt you. The story you immediately, automatically build on top of it, they think I'm incompetent. Everyone noticed. I've ruined this. That's what hurts you. Strip that away and you're left with a sentence someone said in a room. Nothing more. Most of what you call overthinking isn't thinking at all. It's your judgments replaying themselves, dressed up as deep reflection. He wasn't saying the world is soft, or that pain isn't real, or that you should simply talk yourself out of every hard feeling. He was pointing at something more precise, that between any event and you're suffering about it, there's a step you usually skip past too fast to notice: the interpretation. Two people can sit through the identical meeting, hear the identical comment, and walk out into two completely different afternoons. One of them shaken and one of them unbothered because the event was never actually the variable. The judgment was. And if the judgment is the variable, then it's also the lever, the one part of this entire equation that was always quietly within your reach, waiting for you to actually pick it up instead of treating it as fixed. So here's the reframe, and I want you to actually sit with this one, because it's not what you've been told your whole life, not by your teachers, not by the productivity books, not by well-meaning friends who tell you to really think it through. Clear thinking is not the act of gathering more thoughts. It's the discipline of removing the ones that don't belong to the decision in front of you. Say that differently. Clarity is subtraction, not addition. Most people treat a hard decision like a suitcase they need to pack fuller, more research, more opinions, more scenarios run in their head at 1 a.m., when what the decision actually needs is for you to take things out, fear you're not naming, approval you're chasing without admitting it, old arguments that have nothing to do with today's choice but keep sneaking into the room anyway. Let's be precise about what this does not mean, because the obvious objection is coming and I'd rather meet it head on. This is not, don't think about it, just go with your gut. Your gut is not sacred. Your gut is just your fastest, least examined judgment. And sometimes it's wrong in exactly the same way your anxious 2 a.m. brain is wrong, full of old fears, wearing a new decision's clothes. This also isn't about suppressing emotion, pretending you're a calm robot who doesn't feel the stakes. Suppression is just noise you've agreed not to look at, and unexamined noise is the loudest kind. It doesn't disappear. It just moves to the back of the room and gets louder from there. It's also not about becoming detached, indifferent. Above it all, some people hear clarity and imagine a person who simply stops caring. And that's not it either, because a person who stopped caring hasn't achieved clarity. They've just gone numb, and numbness is its own kind of static. What we're after is sharper than either of those. Not less feeling, not no thinking, cleaner thinking. A mind with the static turned down enough that you can actually hear the one or two things that matter. And this directly opposes the thing our culture rewards. Modern life treats thinking hard about it as a virtue in itself. The person agonizing over the decision looks responsible. The person cross-referencing 40 opinions online looks thorough. We've built an entire economy, articles, videos, group chats around the performance of deliberation, where the volume of discussion around a choice has quietly become a stand-in for the quality of it. But agonizing isn't rigor. It's often just fear, running in a loop, borrowing the outfit of carefulness so you don't have to notice. It's actually avoidance. The person who decides quickly and calmly isn't reckless. More often, they've simply done the subtraction already, earlier, quietly, before the moment demanded it, so when the moment arrives, there's less to clear away. So how do you actually do the subtracting? Not as an abstract mood you try to summon, but as something you can practice the next time your head fills with static. There are 5 specific moves that make up this discipline, and I want to walk through each one in order because they build on each other, starting with the most obvious, the one you've probably heard some version of before, all the way through to the one almost nobody actually does, the one that quietly determines more of your life than any of the others. The first move is the most basic, and it's the one Stoics kept returning to more than any other. Separate what's actually yours to decide from what isn't. Picture the scene: you're waiting to hear back about a job or a diagnosis, or whether someone's going to call you back after an awkward conversation. Your brain, starved for control, starts doing something strange. It starts rehearsing outcomes it has zero power over. What will they think? What will happen next? How will this go? You run the good version, then the bad version, then a third version that's somehow worse than either, and none of it changes what's actually in the envelope, the inbox, or the other person's decision. None of that is a decision. It's a performance of control dressed up as thinking, a way of feeling like you're doing something useful with your hands, while the actual outcome sits completely outside your reach. Marcus Aurelius, writing private notes to himself as the most powerful man in Rome, kept coming back to a version of the same reminder. Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should look like, just be one. He wasn't interested in rehearsing hypotheticals. He was interested in the next right action, the one actually inside his hands. Psychologists have a related, well-documented concept called the locus of control. The difference between people who orient their effort toward things within their influence versus people who spend their energy on things outside it, and the research consistently links an internal focus with lower anxiety and better follow-through. It's a simple distinction, but almost nobody applies it in the moment it actually matters, because the pull toward the uncontrollable thing, the outcome, the verdict, the other person's reaction is so much stronger than the pull toward the boring, small, actually actionable thing sitting right in front of you. Here's the reframe. The anxious spinning isn't proof you're being responsible. It's proof you're aiming your attention at the wrong target. Worrying feels like doing something. It has the texture of effort, your heart rate goes up, your thoughts move fast, you feel busy. But feeling busy and being useful are not the same thing, and most spinning is simply your mind mistaking motion for progress. The action you can take today is small and almost embarrassingly simple. Before you let yourself think further about any decision, write one line. The part of this that's actually mine to decide is chu. Everything else you set down. Not forever, just for now. You can pick it back up later if it turns out to matter. Most of the time, it won't. Let me ask you something. How much of your thinking today was actually decision-making, and how much of it was just rehearsal for a conversation that hasn't happened yet? Sit with that for a second, because most people, if they're honest, find the ratio is almost backwards. It's not a comfortable number to look at, but it's a useful one, because once you can see the ratio, you can start changing it, and that's a lot more within your power than most of what's actually keeping you up at night. The second move goes a level deeper, because separating what's yours isn't enough if you're still reacting at the speed of impulse. This is about the gap, the space between something happening and you responding to it. Picture your phone buzzing with a message that has an edge to it. Your thumb is already moving to type a response before your eyes have even finished the sentence, a defense, a correction, actually already half-formed before you've even understood what you're defending against. That's not thinking. That's reflex wearing thinking's clothes. And reflexes, by definition, skip the part where you actually get a say. Epictetus taught his students to notice what he called the impression, the raw first flash of how something strikes you, and to resist rushing straight from impression to reaction. Between the two, he insisted, there's a gap, and that gap is where your actual judgment lives. Most people never find it because they never look for it. Modern psychology gives this the same shape under a different name, the stimulus-response gap. The small window in which a person can choose their reaction instead of simply emitting it. The space cognitive behavioral approaches are built around widening. The reframe here matters. Feeling the flash of anger or fear or hurt doesn't make you weak or irrational. It makes you a person with a nervous system. What determines your decision isn't the flash, it's what you do in the half second after it. It's the same mechanism. Whether it's a message from a coworker, a comment from a stranger online, or a look on someone's face across the dinner table, the flash arrives in a fraction of a second. And the whole quality of your day often gets decided by whatever you do in the fraction of a second right after it. So, the action is concrete. The next time you feel that jolt before a big text, a big email, a big decision, put one physical beat between the impression and the response. Set the phone down. Count to 10. Not because 10 seconds changes the facts, because it changes whether you're the one deciding or the flash is. 10 seconds sounds too small to matter, and that's exactly why almost nobody does it. But the whole point of the gap isn't the length of it, it's that a gap exists at all on purpose, instead of the impression and the reaction fusing into one uninterrupted motion, the way they do by default. Now here's where it gets less comfortable, because the first two moves were about outside triggers, other people, other events. This next one is about something you do to yourself quietly all day long, and it's harder to catch because you're the one telling the story. Here's the counterintuitive part. The version of you that feels most certain is often the version doing the least actual thinking, because certainty is exactly what a finished story feels like from the inside. Smooth, closed, no loose threads left to examine. The third move is this. Before you defend a conclusion, question the story that produced it. Here's the scenario. You've decided your coworker is against you. You've decided the relationship is doomed. You've decided you're bad at this job, this hobby, this version of your life. Maybe it started with one real specific moment, a comment, a missed invitation, a bad week, and somewhere along the way it stopped being about that one thing and quietly became a verdict about the whole relationship, the whole job, the whole you. And once you've decided it, notice what your brain does next. It doesn't go looking for the truth. It goes looking for evidence that you were right all along. Every slightly cold email confirms it. Every good moment gets explained away as a fluke, an exception that proves the rule you've already written in permanent ink. Seneca wrote to a friend that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, that the mind, left unchecked, builds catastrophes out of fragments and then reacts to the catastrophe as if it were fact. This is precisely the mechanism psychologists call confirmation bias, the well-documented tendency to seek out and weight information that supports what you already believe while quietly discounting anything that contradicts it, and it runs alongside a second closely related pattern: cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding a belief and a fact that don't match, which your brain resolves not by changing the belief, but by bending the fact until it fits. Here's the reframe, and it's a freeing one. You are not a liar for doing this. Every human mind does it. The skill isn't never having a biased story, it's catching yourself mid-story and asking one honest question: what would change my mind here? If you can't answer that question, you're not thinking anymore. You're just defending a verdict you already reached, dressing it up in the language of careful consideration when really you finished considering days ago and everything since has just been collecting receipts. The action for today: pick the belief currently driving your biggest current decision and write down one piece of evidence that would prove it wrong. If you can't find one, that's the flag. Not because your belief is automatically false, sometimes it holds up perfectly well under the question, but because a belief that survives an honest attempt to disprove it is worth so much more than one you never tested at all. If you've made it this far into this video, you already think more carefully than most people watching it. Most people bail before the part that asks something of them, and you didn't. That says something about you honestly, and it's worth noticing instead of brushing past. So do one small thing for me. Hit like on this video now before you keep going, because it genuinely helps this reach more people who need exactly this. And stay with me, because that gap I promised you at the very start, the reason trying harder to think actually backfires, that's coming up next. And it's the part that reframes everything you just heard. Here's the part that gets sharper. And it's less about what's happening in your own head and more about who's standing in the room with you while you decide, even when nobody's actually there. The fourth move: notice how much of your thinking is secretly performed for an audience. Picture yourself choosing a college major, a career path, whether to end something or stay in it, whether to move to a different city for reasons that make sense only to you, and somewhere in the middle of that decision, a completely different question sneaks in uninvited. What will people think? Not, is this right for me, but how will this look? You tell yourself you're weighing pros and cons. You're actually running a simulation of a dinner party where someone asks how it's going and you're bracing for their face. Even something as small as posting or not posting something online gets run through the same invisible filter, not do I want to share this, but what will this make people think of me? And somewhere in that filtering, the actual decision quietly gets replaced by a performance of one. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in the privacy of a journal never meant for anyone else's eyes, about how much energy people burn imagining what others think of them, energy that could go towards simply living well instead. He was writing to himself as the single most watched man in the Roman world, and even he identified this as the trap. Psychology names the underlying distortion precisely: the spotlight effect, the well-documented tendency to dramatically overestimate how much other people notice and remember what you do, because you are the main character in your own head and almost nobody else is thinking about you nearly as much as you assume. Here's the reframe. This isn't vanity, it's wiring. Humans evolved in small groups where social standing was survival, and the machinery hasn't caught up to the fact that most of your audience today is imaginary, distracted, and gone from thinking about you within the hour. The action. For the decision in front of you right now, write it twice, once as, what would I choose if no one would ever know? And once as, what am I actually leaning toward? If the two answers don't match, you found exactly where the noise is coming from. This one stings a little the first time you try it, honestly, because most people discover the gap between those two answers is bigger than they expected. That's fine. Discovering it is the whole point. You can't correct for a distortion you've never actually measured. Quick gut check before the last one. Is there a decision you've been calling still thinking about it for longer than you'd admit out loud? Hold that in mind, because this next part is for exactly that decision. The fifth move is the sharpest one, and it's the one most people skip past because it doesn't feel like a decision at all. It feels like nothing happening. This is about the decision you're avoiding by not deciding. Picture the relationship you know isn't working, the resignation letter you've drafted 4 times and never sent, the conversation you keep saying you'll have when the timing's better, the small business idea you've been researching for 2 years without ever actually starting it, the friendship that quietly ended months ago but that you still refer to in the present tense. You tell yourself you're being patient, being careful, gathering more information. Here's the counterintuitive part. Often, you already have every piece of information you need. What you're actually doing is paying a daily tax, a little bit of peace, a little bit of self-respect to avoid one uncomfortable hour. Seneca described most people as living as though they have unlimited time, spending it on everything except the decisions that actually matter, right up until the moment they run out of it. Loss aversion. The well-established finding that the pain of losing something looms larger in the mind than the pleasure of an equivalent gain explains a good part of why this happens. Staying in the ambiguous, undecided middle feels safer than risking the loss that comes with choosing, even when the middle is quietly costing you more than either option would. This is not weakness. It's a very old survival instinct, badly calibrated for a modern decision that isn't actually life-threatening. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish well between this choice might go badly and this choice might kill me. Both register as danger. Both trigger the same pull towards staying exactly where you are, even when where you are is quietly the most expensive option on the table. The reframe, not deciding, is not neutral. It is a decision, just an expensive one, made by default instead of on purpose, and you're paying for it either way. The action, name the decision you've been avoiding, out loud or on paper, and give it a date. Not soon. A date. Something on the calendar closes the open loop your brain has been quietly burning fuel to keep spinning. You don't need to know the outcome yet. You just need to know when you'll stop pretending the undecided middle is free, because it never actually was. Now here's the paradox, the thing I promised you back at the very start of this video, and it's the reason all 5 of these moves work the way they do. You'd think the fix for bad decisions is thinking harder. More analysis, more scenarios run out in your head, more opinions gathered from more people. That is the instinct almost everyone follows, and it is almost exactly backwards. The harder you think in the anxious, spinning, story-building sense, the less clearly you actually see, because you're not adding insight, you're adding noise, and past a certain point, every additional lap around the same decision just deepens the groove instead of revealing anything new. Notice that the word more almost never shows up in any of the 5 moves you just heard. Not more research, not more opinions, not more time spent circling. Every single one of them was a form of taking something away, a false control, a reflexive reaction, an unexamined story, an imaginary audience, an avoided date. That's not a coincidence. That's the entire mechanism. This is the trap of what's sometimes called analysis paralysis. The point at which more information stops improving a decision and starts delaying it, because the thinking has quietly become a substitute for the deciding rather than a path toward it. The people who seem to think clearly under pressure aren't the ones who gathered the most data. They're the ones who did the subtraction, the control check, the gap, the story check, the audience check, the honesty about what they're avoiding early enough and often enough that by the time the moment arrives, there's almost nothing left to clear away. Clarity was never about acquiring more thought. It was about having less of the wrong kind in the way. That's the whole trick, and it's almost insultingly simple once you see it, which is exactly why so few people ever slow down enough to see it. This is also why the smartest people you know aren't always the clearest thinkers. Intelligence gives you the ability to generate more angles, more objections, more clever reasons to keep circling, and without the subtraction habit, that ability just means a smarter mind builds a more elaborate trap for itself. The goal was never to outthink the decision. It was to get out of its way. Think back to the 2 people from the very start of this video, the one who decided in 10 minutes and slept fine, and the one who spent 3 weeks in their own head and still wasn't sure. It was never that the first person had access to better information, or a higher IQ, or some natural gift for decisiveness. It's that they'd already done the subtraction in the background as a habit long before the decision showed up, so when it arrived, there was almost nothing left in the way except the actual choice. The second person was working just as hard, maybe harder. They were just working on the wrong problem the entire time. So let me show you who you become on the other side of this. You wake up and your first 10 minutes are just quiet. Not because nothing's wrong in your life, plenty is still wrong, the way it always is for every person alive, but because you're not carrying 40 unfinished arguments before you've even had coffee. You get the short, slightly cold email from a coworker, and you feel the flash. You still feel it. You're not numb. You're a person, and then there's a gap. And in that gap, you decide what it's actually worth, instead of the flash deciding for you. You catch yourself building a story about someone before the story's finished building itself, and you ask the one honest question, and half the time the story quietly falls apart on its own. Someone asks what you think people will say about your decision, and you notice almost with relief that you don't actually know, and it doesn't move you the way it used to. And the decisions you've been dragging for months, the ones with a date on them now instead of a someday start closing, one at a time. And each time one closes, you feel lighter. Not because it went perfectly, but because you're not carrying it open anymore. The world doesn't get quieter. Your inbox doesn't shrink. People still say things that sting. Deadlines still land badly. Life keeps doing what life does. What changes is you're not fighting two things at once anymore, the actual event and the storm of extra thinking you used to build on top of it. One problem instead of two. That's the whole difference, and it's enormous. You notice it most in the small moments nobody else can see. The pause before you answer, where there used to be an instant reflex. The decision that used to take 3 sleepless nights now taking 1 honest hour. The version of you that used to leave every hard conversation replaying it for days, and now just leaves it because there's nothing left unsaid, nothing left to defend, nothing left to perform. You still care. You still feel things fully. You're just not doing your caring twice, once for the real thing and once again for the imaginary audience watching you care about it. People around you start to notice something has shifted, even if they can't quite name it. You seem calmer in rooms where you used to visibly brace. You give answers instead of hedges. When someone asks what you think, you actually know, because you're not running the question through 5 layers of who might be offended and what will they think before you let yourself answer it. It doesn't make you cold or detached. If anything, people trust you more because a person who's done the subtracting has more room left over for actually listening instead of half listening while their own head keeps spinning in the background. None of this makes the hard decisions disappear. There will still be job offers with no obvious right answer, relationships with real complications, mornings where the static tries to creep back in before you've even had coffee. The difference isn't that life gets simpler. It's that you stop mistaking the noise for the decision itself, and once you can tell the two apart, the actual choice in front of you almost always turns out to be smaller, quieter, and more obvious than the storm you built around it. Here's your challenge, and I want you to actually do this, not just nod along. For the next 7 days, every time you feel your head start to spin on something, a decision, a conversation, a fear, run one quick check before you let yourself keep going. Is this mine to control? And if it is, what's the one honest question I'm avoiding right now? That's it. 2 questions. Say them to yourself like a habit, the same way you'd check a mirror before changing lanes. You don't need a journal, an app, or a morning routine to make this work. You just need to actually pause and ask out loud if you have to, especially on the days it feels inconvenient. Those are the days it matters most. 7 days isn't long enough to become a different person, and that's not the point. It's long enough to notice for the first time in a while how much of your daily static was optional the whole time. Clear thinking was never about having more thoughts. It's about having the discipline to clear away the ones that were never yours to carry in the first place. That's the whole video, distilled down to one sentence you can actually carry with you into tomorrow morning, back into the shower, back into the meeting, back into the moment your phone buzzes with something that has an edge to it. It's a small sentence for something that changes how heavy your whole day feels. If this landed for you, tell me the one decision you're finally giving a date to comment it below, because writing it down where someone else can see it is often the thing that actually makes it real. And if you want more of this Stoic thinking translated into the actual mess of modern life, subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is built on. Thank you for staying to the end. Think less, see more.